So this is a follow-up to our previous video, and I know that we were giving the 1600 AF a hard time, mainly because we couldn't clock any higher than the 3.9 we were at, and it was hard to get into 4.0 and even higher clocks. But after going through every single little voltage step that we could, we were able to get the thing to what you're looking at right now, which is a 4.3. Not stable, but we're able to get to 4.3 nonetheless. So now let's see how it performs under benchmarks. So now we're in here at 3.9, and just for reference, the Cinebench score is 2,900 points for multi-core, and on our CPU-Z bench, single core is 423, multi-threaded 3585. That's really not a bad score at all. All right, so now we're in here at 3.9, which is the highest we were able to get on before, and we were using auto for the set voltage, and the get was a 1.13 volts, so it's relatively low. Our 20 scores respectable. CPU-Z is also relatively respectable. Now let's see if we can go a little bit higher here in frequency. So after some fine tuning, I was able to go over the 3.9 gigahertz that I got before on just using the audio setting. You can see here in CPU-Z, it's running 4.1. It took a while to get to 4.1 actually. Had to get to an offset number of 0.188, which you add that to the base voltage of 1.1, which is stock. So when you put it under full load, all core, ends up around 1.32 is where you end up. And 4.1 is really the max setting you can get to where it's stable. So, you can see that in R20, there was an improvement by going from 3.9 to 4.1. It went up to 401. The multi went up to 3066. And CPU-Z's numbers also went down, ever so slightly in CPU-Z. But you were still able to see some improvement. Right now, you can see that we're in here at 4.3 gigahertz. It's really not stable. It's not stable enough to run R20. It's not stable enough to run benchmarks. It's probably going to crash. And quite honestly, when you look at it, we were able to get to a stable 4.1, right? 4.1 gigahertz. This has a base of 3.2 gigahertz, so that's pretty far out from it. This is a 1600 AF AMD R5. And the 1600 AF, if you don't know, is really a 12 nanometer part instead of the 14 nanometer part. So it's the 2600 without all the benefits of being a 2600. So you can't even run Ryzen Master on a 1600 AF, and the microcode that the BIOS reads for the 1600 AF pretty much says it's a first generation Ryzen part. So you're not going to get all the benefits of being able to tweak it like you would a 2600. So it's probably better to get a 2600 if you can get to these same clocks. If you can get to a 4.1 clock fairly easily, that's not bad. To run a 3.9 gigahertz at 1.13 volts get fully loaded, that's not bad. But for 40, 50 bucks more, you can get a 3600 with a current date code and get up to 4.5 stable all core. And that's a pretty big difference in performance to get to that. And even have PBO running with that too, and not have to do a fixed voltage. Whenever you do any kind of overclock on the 1600 AF, this is a fixed voltage, right? This voltage is fixed. It's at 1.4 right now, idling. And the multiplier is fixed. So there aren't any of the power saving features that are in the CPU that are available on a 3000, on a Ryzen 3000, or maybe even Ryzen 2600 has some of those features set in it. And to go from a stable 4.1 to a 4.3 is just a massive amount of voltage, right? It's a big amount of voltage. You couldn't even get anywhere in between. 0.3 plus offset is the maximum that the board will let you add. It's the absolute maximum. So there's not even any more that you can run to it. So to even get any higher clock stable is a challenge. So 1600 AF, it's a disappointment still. I got I'm getting over it a little bit for the price point. $104 processor, actually it's supposed to be $85. An $85 processor to get 4.1 gigahertz, you can't be too mad about that. But quite honestly, it's a 2600 with a 1600 badge on it. So it's a 2600 without all the benefits. You're basically tagged as a first gen Ryzen part, and so the motherboards aren't going to let you have those extra features or overclocking ability that you'd have with a genuine 2600. But quite honestly, just get a 3600. It's just going to be better for the long run anyways, right? It's probably going to be $40, $50 more than a 1600 AF, or even a used 2600 you can get cheaper. So as disappointing as that is, this is where we're at. I'm not going to let this thing sit at 1.4 volts all the time. That's just idle. I think on the 1600 AF, probably a 3.9 is a comfortable number to sit out without having to throw too much voltage at the processor day in, day out. It's kind of a bummer that it's not over 4.0, but you know, for $85, can you complain? The Cinebench numbers are far better than I think you're seeing with even a 9600K, right? So it's something worthwhile for $85, and you can tune with it. And don't forget, this is still a 6-core 12-thread processor. And so, you know, I actually am editing these videos and outputting them straight on this processor in 1080p, 30 frames. It doesn't take very long to do it. So it's still a very good processor for the money. If you like this content, subscribe, like, and check out the next video.